At first, she seemed perfect, attentive, kind, and full of warmth. She had this way of making everyone feel seen, as if the world outside the classroom didn't matter, and only our lives did. I trusted her instantly, and maybe that was my first mistake. I met her during my first semester as a student teacher in that small, quiet school. Her reputation preceded her, admired by students, respected by colleagues, almost untouchable. She welcomed me with a smile that seemed genuine, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and encouragement. I was drawn to her, not just for her guidance, but for the subtle way she made me feel important, like my thoughts and feelings mattered more than they had anywhere else. For weeks, I tried to focus on my lessons, on proving myself as a capable teacher, but every encounter with her blurred my boundaries, every conversation slipped from professional to personal. She asked about my family, my dreams, my fears, small things that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow they did, and I, naive and longing for connection, told her everything. It wasn't obvious at first, nothing screamed warning. She was patient, always listening, always offering advice. But gradually, a pattern emerged, a subtle intimacy, gestures that lingered a little too long, glances that seemed heavier than necessary. I dismissed them, convinced that I was imagining things, that I was reading too much into her kindness. Then came the late evenings. What began as innocent discussions about lesson plans slowly turned into long, private conversations after the school day ended. The line between mentor and something else blurred, and before I even realized it, I was caught in a web of attention, praise, and subtle manipulation. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just emotional support, but deep down, I felt a strange tension building, a mix of guilt, desire, and fear. Something in the air was shifting, and I couldn't deny the truth. She was no longer just attentive. She was crossing lines that should never have existed between a teacher and a student teacher, between a mentor and someone who trusted her completely, and I was powerless to stop it. After weeks of subtle shifts, the line between guidance and something far more dangerous vanished completely. It started with small gestures, an encouraging touch on the shoulder, a lingering look that sent shivers down my spine, a private joke that no one else could understand. I tried to rationalize them as harmless, as part of her mentorship. But deep inside, I knew the truth. This was no longer about teaching. This was about her control, her influence, and the power she wielded over me. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, she invited me to stay late and review lesson plans. The classroom was empty, silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. She leaned over my shoulder, her hand brushing against mine accidentally, she claimed. I froze, the warmth of her touch igniting feelings I had been desperately trying to suppress. "Don't be so tense," she whispered, her voice low and magnetic. "You're too hard on yourself. You're doing so well. I just want to help you more than anyone else can." Her words wrapped around me, suffocating and intoxicating at once. I wanted to resist, to step back, but the trust I had placed in her was like chains I could not break. I wanted her approval, her attention, and I feared losing it more than I feared crossing the lines I knew I shouldn't. Days turned into nights filled with private conversations, secretive messages, and moments that felt almost like stolen reality. I was caught between awe and fear, drawn to her charisma, yet terrified of the consequences. Every time I told myself to stop, to regain control, she would pull me back in, her warmth masking a subtle manipulation I didn't yet have the clarity to recognize. Then it escalated. A touch became a lingering hand on my back. A glance became a whispered promise of intimacy. I realized too late that what I had mistaken for guidance and mentorship was something far more dangerous. She had created dependency, and I had fallen completely under her influence. I felt trapped. My emotions were a battlefield of guilt, confusion, and desire. I knew this was wrong morally, professionally, emotionally, but the attention I craved, the affirmation I had never received anywhere else, held me captive. One night, alone in the classroom, she leaned closer than ever. "You've worked so hard," she said softly, her eyes locking with mine. "And I notice you. I see you. You deserve more than this, than everyone else gives you." Her words were intoxicating, dangerous. My heart raced, my mind screamed for reason, but my body betrayed me. In that moment, I understood the full power of her manipulation. She had crossed every boundary, and I had allowed her. And the worst part, I couldn't stop myself from wanting more. By now, I was trapped in a labyrinth of desire, guilt, and fear. Every day at school felt like walking on a tightrope over an endless abyss. Her attention, once a warm comfort, had become a force that both consumed and controlled me. I was hyper-aware of every glance, every tone of voice, every subtle shift in her behavior. And yet, despite the danger, I couldn't break free. It wasn't just the physical attraction anymore, it was the way she made me feel understood, seen, and essential. I became addicted to the small affirmations, a nod of approval, a whispered compliment, a lingering smile. These moments were fleeting, yet they anchored me, making the inevitable reality, how wrong this was, impossible to confront fully. Late nights became our secret ritual. She invited me to her office under the guise of professional review, but the air was thick with tension. Her presence, the soft lamplight, the quiet that enveloped us, all conspired to blur every line I had tried to draw. One night, she leaned close, and her words pierced me with both seduction and guilt. "You work so hard, you deserve someone who sees you. Someone who understands you completely." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, my rational mind screaming, "Stop, this is wrong." But my body betrayed me, responding instinctively to her touch, her words, her gaze. I knew I was being manipulated, yet every moment of resistance crumbled under the intensity of her attention. It escalated further. Messages arrived late at night, filled with double meanings, flattery, and subtle promises. I would tell myself to ignore them, to regain control, but I found excuses. "It's just guidance, she's helping me." And when the opportunity came to meet her privately, I rationalized that it was professional, until the line was gone entirely. Soon, secrecy became a necessity. Every interaction had to be hidden, every message deleted, every whispered conversation concealed from the eyes of colleagues and friends. The thrill of secrecy twisted into fear, fear of being discovered, fear of judgment, fear of losing the very attention I had become dependent on. Yet, the more I feared, the deeper I sank. The emotional toll was immense. Guilt gnawed at me constantly, a persistent shadow I could not escape. I hated myself for allowing it to happen, for losing control, for letting someone manipulate me so completely. I loved the attention, craved it even, yet each stolen moment made me sick with shame. My work suffered, my relationships outside of school faltered, and I began to feel like a prisoner in my own life, trapped by desire, deceit, and the consequences I refused to confront. Then came the first warning sign. A fellow teacher noticed my distracted demeanor, my late-night absences, my constant nervous energy. "Are you okay?" she asked one afternoon, her voice gentle, but her eyes sharp with concern. I forced a smile, my heart hammering. "Yes, just tired," I lied, the weight of my secret pressing against my chest. I knew she suspected something, and the fear of discovery was now tangible, suffocating. It was only a matter of time before the web I had been entangled in began to unravel. The more I indulged in her attention, the greater the risk. I felt the first real pangs of panic, not for losing her, but for the destruction that would inevitably follow if anyone discovered the truth. And deep down, I knew it would be catastrophic. Lives could be destroyed, careers ruined, trust broken irreparably. And yet, the pull of her manipulation, her intoxicating attention, kept me tethered, unable to pull away, unable to see the danger clearly until it was almost too late. By the end of that week, I realized with a cold clarity, I was no longer just a student-teacher caught in admiration. I was part of a dangerous, forbidden dance, a web of deceit and infidelity that could shatter everything if exposed. And for the first time, the fear of what was coming, the inevitable fallout, terrified me more than the thrill had ever thrilled me. The tension had been building for weeks, a silent storm raging in every corner of my life. Each morning, I walked into the school with a fragile mask of composure, hiding the chaos that churned within me. My lessons became mechanical, my attention fragmented, my interactions strained. Every glance from a colleague felt like a potential accusation, every whisper a judgment I could not escape. It finally came to a head one afternoon. I had stayed late, ostensibly to prepare for an upcoming class, but really, I was waiting for her, my teacher, my manipulator, my obsession. The classroom was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. When she arrived, the air immediately changed. A mixture of anticipation, fear, and desire hung between us, almost tangible. "You've been avoiding me," she said softly, stepping closer. Her eyes were intense, almost hypnotic. "You know you don't have to. I want you here." I swallowed hard, the rational part of my mind screaming at me to leave, to run, to escape the trap I had willingly stepped into. But the magnetic pull of her attention was stronger than fear, stronger than reason. I'm just tired," I muttered, though I knew she wouldn't believe me. She smiled, a smile that carried both warmth and danger. "We both know that's not true. Don't lie to me, or yourself." And in that moment, everything broke. The careful compartmentalization I had maintained for so long collapsed. My feelings, my guilt, my desire, my shame, all collided in a wave I could no longer control. She reached out, her hand brushing mine, and I froze, knowing I was crossing a line I could never uncross. Weeks of secrecy, manipulation, and emotional dependency had built an invisible cage around me, and now it was crushing me. I was trapped, fully aware of the consequences, fully conscious of how wrong this was, yet unable to pull myself away. Then came the confrontation I had been dreading. One of my colleagues, sharp, observant, and perceptive, called me out. "I know something is going on," she said, her voice low but cutting. "I don't know all the details, but your behavior isn't normal. You're not the person I know." Panic surged through me. My heart raced, my chest tightened, and I felt the first real wave of fear, not just fear of exposure, but fear of the irreversible damage I had caused. "It's complicated," I stammered, avoiding her gaze. "Complicated doesn't explain secrecy, exhaustion, and constant distraction," she pressed. "Someone's being hurt. Someone's crossing boundaries, and I think you know it." I could say nothing. She was right. I had allowed myself to be manipulated, had indulged in attention I didn't deserve, and had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. The weight of my actions pressed down like an anvil, and for the first time, I realized just how far I had fallen. That night, I stayed at the empty school long after everyone had gone, sitting at my desk, staring at the papers I had prepared, unable to focus. I felt hollow, trapped in my own mistakes, consumed by guilt and shame. I knew the fallout was inevitable. The whispers would start. The judgment would spread. Careers could be ruined, reputations destroyed. And worst of all, I had betrayed someone I had once trusted completely, my mentor, and perhaps more tragically, myself. I began to see the full consequences of my actions. The emotional manipulation I had endured, the boundaries I had violated, the professional and personal lines I had crossed. It was a disaster waiting to unfold. And I knew that sooner or later, the world would come crashing down around me, leaving nothing but the wreckage of my choices. I wanted to stop. I wanted to regain control. But the pull of desire, the need for validation, the addiction to her attention, it was stronger than any resolve I had left. I was addicted to the chaos, addicted to the forbidden, and terrified of the inevitable consequences that now loomed over me like a dark storm. As I finally left the classroom that night, the hallway empty and silent, I whispered to myself, trembling, "I have gone too far. I know it. I can't undo it. And soon, everything I've known will shatter." The breaking point had arrived, and I could feel it in my bones. The storm was coming, and there would be no turning back. The next morning, I woke with a sense of dread heavier than anything I had ever felt. The weight of my secrets pressed against my chest like a boulder, suffocating and relentless. I knew the whispers had begun, or would begin soon. Every glance from a colleague, every passing student, seemed charged with suspicion. I walked the hallways like a ghost, haunted by my own actions, aware that every moment of carelessness could ignite a scandal that would consume me entirely. By lunchtime, the rumors had spread faster than I could have imagined. Someone had noticed the subtle interactions, the lingering glances, the late-night meetings. A teacher approached me, her expression tight with controlled frustration. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low but sharp. "Now." I followed her into an empty classroom, my heart hammering. Every step felt like walking deeper into a trap. She closed the door behind us, the air thick with tension. "You know what's happening," she said, her eyes blazing. "Do you understand the consequences if this continues? The careers ruined, the trust broken, the damage done to everyone involved." "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I know. I've already made a terrible mistake, and I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it alone," she snapped, frustration and fear mingling in her tone. "You need to stop, now, before it destroys everything, including you." Her words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to protest, to explain, to justify, but I had no defense. I had crossed lines I couldn't erase, surrendered to temptation I should have resisted, and now, there was no turning back. Later that day, I confronted her, the teacher who had pulled me into this web of desire and manipulation. My hands shook, my heart pounded, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of fear. "We can't do this anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "This has gone too far. It's wrong, for both of us." She tilted her head, a smile that was both infuriating and terrifying playing on her lips. "Do you really think it's that simple?" she asked. "After everything, after all the time we've spent together, you're walking away now?" "I have to," I said firmly, though my voice faltered. "I can't risk everything. My career, my future, my sanity. I can't live like this anymore." Her smile faded, replaced by something darker, anger, disappointment, and the faintest trace of hurt. "So that's it," she demanded. "After all I've done for you, you're just leaving? Walking away?" "Yes," I said, my chest tight with guilt and fear. Because it's the only way to survive this, the only way to make things right again. The confrontation left me drained, trembling with relief and terror, but it didn't end the chaos. The school was buzzing with speculation, whispers grew louder, and colleagues eyed me with suspicion. I felt the first real pangs of social isolation, the price of indulgence, the cost of desire, the collapse of boundaries I had allowed to vanish. I returned home that evening, exhausted and broken, and finally faced the reflection of the person I had become. The guilt was suffocating, the shame unbearable. I could barely recognize myself in the mirror, someone who had surrendered control, allowed manipulation, and nearly destroyed everything that mattered. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered to myself, voice shaking with desperation, I can't believe I let it go this far. I can't believe I almost ruined everything. How did I let desire, attention, and manipulation blind me so completely? The night was long and restless. Sleep evaded me, replaced by relentless thoughts, guilt, and the looming fear of the consequences that awaited. I knew the road ahead would be unforgiving. Apologies, explanations, and attempts at redemption would be required, but nothing could erase what had happened. Every step forward would be heavy with the weight of my mistakes. And yet, amidst the chaos and despair, a small spark remained, a fragile understanding that, perhaps, if I faced the consequences fully, admitted my faults honestly, and committed to change, I could still salvage a life, a career, and the shattered trust I had taken for granted. But first, I had to survive the storm. The real reckoning was only just beginning. The days that followed were unbearable. Every glance from a colleague felt like a dagger, every whisper a judgment I could not escape. The small spark of attention I had once craved had become a blazing inferno of shame and fear. I could feel the consequences of my actions closing in, suffocating me from every direction. One morning, the principal called me into her office. The walk down the hallway felt like crossing a battlefield. The walls seemed to close in, the whispers of students and teachers echoing in my mind. When I entered, her eyes were stern, sharp, but not without a trace of disappointment. "We need to discuss your behavior," she began, her voice calm but authoritative. "There have been concerning reports, of your interactions with a colleague. Do you understand the severity of this situation?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Yes," I whispered. I know I made mistakes." You know," she interrupted, leaning forward. "Do you truly understand the damage that's been done? Not just to yourself, but to the integrity of this school, the trust of your colleagues, and the professional boundaries that were meant to protect you?" Her words cut through me like knives. I felt exposed, naked in my own shame. Every stolen glance, every private conversation, every moment of weakness had led me here. And there was no hiding from it now. "I understand," I said finally, my voice breaking. I allowed myself to be manipulated. I crossed lines I should never have crossed. And I am ready to accept whatever consequences come from it. The principal studied me, her eyes narrowing. "This will not be easy. People are hurt. Trust has been broken. And the public nature of this, it cannot be ignored. You must face everyone you've affected, admit your faults honestly, and accept that some bridges may never be rebuilt." I nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in my throat. The reality was worse than I had imagined. My career, my reputation, my relationships, all threatened by my own poor choices and the manipulations I had allowed. And then came the confrontation with her, the teacher who had ensnared me in this web of desire and deception. I met her in the empty classroom where it had all escalated. The air was heavy with tension, memories of temptation and manipulation lingering like smoke. "We need to end this," I said, my hands trembling. "It's over. I won't allow this to continue. It's wrong, professionally, morally, everything." She looked at me, a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief in her eyes. "Over? Just like that? After everything? You're just walking away?" "Yes," I said firmly, though my heart ached. "Because if we don't, it will destroy both of us. I need to take responsibility for my actions, and I can't do that while being pulled back into this." Her expression softened slightly, but the tension remained. "Do you realize what you're giving up?" she asked quietly. "The attention, the connection, the power you felt?" "I do," I replied, my voice trembling but resolute. "And I also realize the destruction it's caused. I can't keep pretending it's harmless. I have to face the consequences, no matter how painful, no matter how humiliating. I have to rebuild my life honestly, even if it means losing what I thought I wanted." The days that followed were a whirlwind of confrontations, apologies, and reflect-irons. I faced colleagues, students, and friends, admitting my faults openly and accepting their judgments. Some were angry, some betrayed, some skeptical, but slowly, through honesty and humility, small steps of trust began to return. I also began to confront myself fully, the addiction to attention, the desire for validation, the weakness that had allowed manipulation to take root. The process was agonizing, often humiliating, but necessary. I had to dismantle the person I had been to become someone capable of integrity and accountability. Late at night, alone in the quiet of my apartment, I reflected on the path I had walked, the seduction, the manipulation, the indulgence, and the collapse. The lessons were brutal. Desire unchecked leads to ruin, trust can be shattered in an instant, and redemption is never easy. Yet amidst the wreckage, I found a glimmer of hope. By facing every consequence, admitting my faults fully, and committing to genuine change, I realized that I could salvage not just my career, but my soul. It would take time, persistence, and unrelenting honesty, but I was ready to walk that path, no matter how long or painful. I whispered to myself in the darkness, I have fallen. I have been manipulated. I have betrayed trust, but I will rise. I will face every consequence. I will rebuild, not for approval, not for attention, but for myself, and for the integrity I almost lost forever. The reckoning had begun, and this time, there would be no running, no excuses, no illusions, only the long, painful, and ultimately redemptive path forward. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Every day felt like walking on shards of glass, a test of patience, humility, and endurance. I had to confront not only the consequences of my actions but the very essence of who I had become, the flaws, the weaknesses, the moments of temptation that had led me here. The first step was repairing relationships. I started with my colleagues, those I had let down through my distraction, secrecy, and poor judgment. Apologies alone were not enough. I had to prove through consistent actions that I was committed to change. I stayed late to help others, offered guidance where I had once faltered, and avoided every situation that could be construed as improper. Slowly, very slowly, respect returned, not fully, not immediately, but in fragments that promised something better if I nurtured it carefully. Then came the confrontation with the students who had once admired me. I had let them down too, blurring the lines between mentorship and personal indulgence. I addressed them honestly, acknowledging my mistakes without excuses, and expressed my commitment to their well-being and to ethical guidance. Some were skeptical, some disappointed, but over time, many began to trust me again, cautiously observing the change in my behavior. The hardest step, however, was confronting her, the teacher who had drawn me into this chaos. I knew that reconciliation in any form was impossible. Our paths had diverged irreparably. Still, I needed closure, a way to reclaim my autonomy and disentangle myself from the manipulation that had nearly destroyed me. We met one afternoon in the empty classroom where everything had escalated. The silence was thick, heavy with months of tension, guilt, and unspoken words. She studied me with those piercing eyes, searching for traces of the old dependence that had once consumed me. I'm done, I said firmly, though my voice wavered. We can't continue. It's over. I need to take responsibility for my life, my career, and my actions. She tilted her head, a mixture of disbelief and faint hurt flickering across her face. Just like that, she asked softly, after everything, you walk away? Yes, I replied, steadier now, because I have to. Because continuing this, it destroys both of us. I need to face the consequences of my choices fully, and I cannot do that while being pulled back into this. Her gaze softened, though the tension remained. You're stronger than I thought, she said quietly, perhaps too strong for what we had. And with that, I stepped away. The chains of manipulation, desire, and dependency finally began to loosen. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of freedom, not absolute, not unburdened, but real. I turned my attention fully to myself. I started therapy, confronting the psychological patterns that had left me vulnerable to manipulation. I journaled, reflected, and dissected every moment of weakness, every decision that had led me astray. Slowly, the inner turmoil began to give way to clarity. I understood the depth of my mistakes, but also the possibility of genuine growth. With each passing day, I rebuilt my professional life. Lessons were planned with care, boundaries were strictly maintained, and mentorship became ethical and supportive without crossing lines. Students respected me not for intimacy, but for integrity. Colleagues observed the change, offering cautious approval, and over time, the environment that had once been toxic for me transformed into a space of responsibility, respect, and professional pride. And then came the hardest reconciliation of all, myself. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, reflecting on the desire, guilt, and manipulation that had nearly ruined me. I forgave myself, not for the mistakes, but for my humanity, the weakness, the longing, the errors of judgment. I understood that true growth comes not from avoiding mistakes, but from confronting them fully, enduring the consequences, and committing to change. One evening, as I walked through the empty hallways of the school, I realized something profound. I was no longer the person who had been trapped, manipulated, and lost. I had faced every shadow of my past, endured every pang of guilt, and made choices that, though painful, rebuilt my integrity. I whispered into the empty corridors, a vow to myself that would guide every future step. I will live with honesty. I will maintain boundaries. I will honor the trust I rebuild. And I will never allow manipulation, desire, or weakness to control me again. The storm of the past had passed. The ruins of my mistakes remained as reminders, but they were no longer prisons. They were lessons, painful, unforgiving, yet ultimately transformative. And in that quiet moment, walking alone under the flickering lights of the empty school, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not the fleeting comfort of attention, not the intoxicating thrill of desire, but a deep, unshakable peace, the knowledge that I had survived the storm, faced the consequences fully, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more aware of the fragile, invaluable gift of trust. The months that followed were nothing short of a crucible. Every day demanded vigilance, self-reflection, and unwavering commitment to the principles I had nearly lost. I rebuilt not only my professional life but also the person I had allowed to be manipulated and led astray. Boundaries were re-established, ethics upheld, and every interaction carefully measured. Yet, the real challenge was not external, it was the ongoing reconciliation with my own conscience. I spent countless nights alone, revisiting every moment that had led me down the dangerous path of desire and manipulation. I dissected my motives, my weaknesses, my cravings for attention, and the longing for validation I had mistaken for affection. I understood that redemption was not a single act, it was a relentless, daily effort to live consciously, ethically, and honestly. Then came the moment of reckoning with those I had affected most. I reached out to colleagues I had disappointed, admitting mistakes openly, expressing regret without excuses, and demonstrating, through actions rather than words, that I had changed. Slowly, cautiously, trust began to return. Eyes that had once doubted me softened, conversations grew warmer, and a tentative respect began to take root once more. I also confronted the students who had been inadvertently caught in the fallout of my actions. I addressed them honestly, taking responsibility without shifting blame, acknowledging my human flaws, and committing to guiding them with integrity and care. Their responses were mixed, some skeptical, some forgiving, but I learned that rebuilding trust is a gradual process, and every small step mattered. Finally, I faced her, the teacher whose attention had led me into the storm of infidelity and manipulation. We met one last time in the classroom that had witnessed the height of temptation and the collapse of boundaries. The air was thick with memories, tension, and unspoken words. "This ends here," I said, my voice steady, though my heart still ached. "I cannot allow this to continue. I have to take full responsibility for my life, my actions, and my choices." Her eyes softened, tinged with a mix of disappointment, respect, and something I could not name. "You're walking away with courage," she said quietly. "Perhaps it's the only way either of us survives this." And with that, I stepped away, for good. The invisible chains of manipulation and desire finally fell away. For the first time, I felt the full measure of freedom, the freedom to live ethically, the freedom to rebuild, the freedom to define myself beyond mistakes. I continued the slow work of rebuilding my life, one day at a time. Professional excellence returned, boundaries remained unbroken, and relationships once strained began to heal. I focused on personal growth, seeking therapy, self-reflection, and deep engagement with my values. But the most profound transformation occurred within. I forgave myself, not for the mistakes, but for being human, for being vulnerable, and for learning the hard lessons that life demanded. I embraced the scars of my past as markers of growth, not chains of shame. I learned that true integrity is born not from avoiding mistakes, but from confronting them fully, enduring the consequences, and emerging stronger. Months later, I walked through the school corridors with a calm I had never known before. Students smiled, colleagues acknowledged me with genuine warmth, and the environment, once fraught with tension, now radiated respect and trust. I had faced the chaos, survived the storm, and emerged transformed. Standing alone in the empty classroom, I whispered to myself, a vow etched in the deepest part of my soul: I will live with honesty, integrity, and courage. I will honor the trust I rebuild and never allow desire, manipulation, or weakness to guide my actions again. I am accountable, I am aware, and I am free. The shadows of the past remained, not as prisons, but as guides. The storm had passed, leaving behind clarity, strength, and the unshakable understanding that redemption is not granted, it is earned, day by day, choice by choice. And in that quiet, solitary moment, I felt a profound truth: though I had fallen, I had risen. Though I had been lost, I had found myself. And though the path had been painful, treacherous, and humbling, I was finally whole. The journey was not over. Life would continue to test me, challenge me, tempt me, but now I had the tools, the awareness, and the resilience to meet every challenge with integrity and strength. I had faced the abyss, survived the storm, and emerged, not perfect, but redeemed, wiser, and fully alive. The months of struggle, reflection, and repair had transformed me in ways I could scarcely have imagined. I was no longer the person ensnared by desire, manipulation, and weakness. Yet, I knew that true redemption required one final test, not just of my actions, but of the integrity I had rebuilt, the boundaries I had reinforced, and the trust I had worked so tirelessly to restore. The test came unexpectedly. The school organized a mentorship program, pairing experienced teachers with new staff for guidance and support. I was assigned a young, ambitious teacher who reminded me so much of myself at the beginning of my journey, eager, vulnerable, and yearning for approval. For the first time, I had the opportunity to shape someone else's professional life ethically, without personal desire clouding judgment. The responsibility weighed heavily. Every choice, every word, every gesture had to be precise, transparent, and above reproach. The temptation to take shortcuts, to indulge in favoritism, even subtly, was there, but I met it head-on, armed with the hard-earned wisdom of my past mistakes. I guided, I encouraged, I corrected, and I supported, all without crossing the boundaries that had once been my undoing. Weeks passed, and I saw the transformation not in myself, but in the person I mentored. Confidence grew, skills improved, and trust developed. And in this, I found a profound sense of purpose. I realized that redemption is not just about surviving one's mistakes, it is about using the lessons learned to create good, to guide others, and to live with integrity every single day. Then came a final confrontation with my past, the teacher who had once drawn me into chaos. She approached me quietly one afternoon in the staff lounge. "I've been observing," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "You've changed. I see it. You've taken everything you went through and transformed it into something remarkable. You're not the same person I knew. You've survived the storm." Her words were both validating and bittersweet. I replied. "But it was never easy. I lost myself, I hurt others, and I nearly destroyed everything. Redemption doesn't erase the past, it only gives you the chance to do better in the future." She nodded, a faint smile crossing her lips. "Then you've truly learned." The sense of closure was profound. I had faced manipulation, indulgence, temptation, and guilt. I had confronted colleagues, students, mentors, and, most importantly, myself. And in every confrontation, every apology, every difficult choice, I had earned the right to stand tall once more. Life continued, as it always does, full of challenges, temptations, and moments of uncertainty. But now, I faced each one with clarity, honesty, and unwavering self-awareness. I had rebuilt my career, restored trust, and reclaimed my sense of self. And though the memories of the storm remained, they served not as chains, but as guides, reminders of how far I had fallen and how far I had risen. One quiet evening, alone in the empty classroom where so much had begun and so much had ended, I whispered a vow into the shadows: I will live ethically, honestly, and courageously. I will guide without indulgence, love without manipulation, and lead with integrity. I have fallen, I have been tested, and I have survived. And from this day forward, I will live fully, faithfully, and without compromise. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Redemption is not a final destination, but a continuous journey. A journey built on accountability, self-awareness, and the courage to face one's darkest moments and emerge stronger. The storm had passed. The web of manipulation had unraveled. The mistakes of the past had been confronted, and the lessons learned. And I, once lost in desire and weakness, had finally found my path, one of integrity, strength, and enduring redemption. I stepped out of the classroom into the cool evening air, feeling the weight of the past lifted, the clarity of the present guiding me, and the promise of the future waiting to be shaped by every conscious, ethical choice I would make from this day forward. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly free.